What if a standard B5 Audi S4 isn't enough for you? Well, you can modify it like this one and get 600 horsepower out of it. But what if you want something stock? Well, you could get an Audi RS4. But if that isn't enough for you, you could do what this owner has done. Because this monster B5 Audi RS4 is upgraded and has 650 to 700 horsepower on low boost, thanks to the fact that it's gone from a 2.7 litre all the way up to a 3 litre. So let's check this car out and also find out some of the differences between a B5 S4 and a B5 RS4. And while we're in the video, let me know your thoughts on either of these two cars. And also please don't follow RetroGarage or subscribe to RetroGarage if you don't like old school and classic cars like these. And definitely don't join the 580,000 or so other car enthusiasts who love exactly the same cars as I do over on the RetroGarage Instagram. The Audi B5 RS4 was produced between 1999 and 2001, with about 6,000 of them made, and they acted as somewhat of a successor to the iconic Audi RS2, which was a joint venture between Porsche and Quattro GmbH, with the Audi RS4 being built by Audi Sport, which is the continuation of the Quattro GmbH that built that RS2. We're going to talk about the stock RS4 and the differences between an RS4 and an S4 before we get into the specific modifications this exact car has, because the list is pretty extensive. The Audi RS4 B5 was built from 1999 to 2001, with about 6,000 of them made, and they acted somewhat as a continuation or a successor to the Audi RS2, the iconic Audi RS2, which was co-built by Porsche and Quattro GmbH. And it's a worthy successor, to say the least. Just like the Audi RS2 got its basis and its engine from the S2, being that 5-cylinder turbo, the RS4 got its basis from the S4 with a 2.7 litre V6 twin turbo. But that engine went on a little bit of a holiday to the UK, and in the process visited a company called Cosworth, which you may be familiar with from Mercedes 190e, and of course the iconic Ford Sierra and Escort Cosworths. And Cosworth took those engines, changed around the heads, changed some of the turbos and some of the other parts of it, and brought it from the S4's 265 horsepower to the RS4's 375 horsepower. And while the B5 S4 came as an Avant or a saloon, the RS4, well, it came only as an Avant, as a continuation of that RS2 tradition of, well, Audi and fast Avants. And before you ask, yes, the B5 is the car out of that iconic Was ist das für ein Kombi video. You know, the one of the guys in the Porsche in the German Autobahn, and all of a sudden they're overtaken, or should I say undertaken, by an iconic Audi RS4 B5.
Guck mal, was ist mit dem Ding los? Das geht ja wie Sau. Guck hier, was ist das für ein Kombi?
But while from a glance these cars look quite similar from the outside and share similar underpinnings of the engine wise, well, there are quite a few differences on the outside as well. Most notably these wider arches, which from memory are about 6 centimeters wider in general than those of the S4, which look wider on their own until you see them compared to the RS4. And the rear arches obviously continue that trend as well. One thing you will notice that's the same is the twin exhaust pipes out one side. S4 and the RS4. It's one of my favourite features of old school 90s and 80s German performance cars is that all the performance cars were denoted by twin exit exhaust on the one side, typically the left side. And I really wish that manufacturers, especially German ones, brought that back, because I'm not a fan of all these quad tip exhausts and, you know, basically trying to have as many exhaust pipes as possible, especially on stuff like 2 litre TSI engines. And while we're on the topic of complaining about modern cars, I'm also not a big fan of the fact that Audi's using the red rhombus, which was previously on S models and RS models on pretty much all of their modern cars now, even if it's not an S or an RS. I've done a full video on this B5 S4 already, and you can find it linked below in the description, and I'll also put it up here in the top right hand corner, where I talk about whether this is the perfect daily for me. Externally, the back bumpers are obviously different. You don't really get any kind of inset grills. Even if they are fake here on the RS4, you don't get that styling on the S4. You don't get those widened arches, and the RS4 is also treated to this lovely front bumper, which harks back a little bit to the RS2 with the shape of this center section and these outer shapes being quite curved. But it did get this addition of these vents here on the side, something that became quite iconic for RS4 models moving forward. The B5 RS4 and the B7 RS4 being the two most notable examples of using those vents. And the B5 RS4 also got this nice little feature of the aluminium mirror caps. On the inside then, things are quite similar to how they would be in the S4, with the addition of carbon trim and a clock that goes to 310 kilometers an hour. Mixed in with an extra bit of detailing around the gauges themselves, RS4 badge, and of course an RS4 badge on the steering wheel as well. And as you can see, it is a 6-speed manual. And this one is of course kitted with these gorgeous Recaro bucket seats, which actually suit this car quite a lot. But as with most Audis of the era, not a single cup holder to be found, because Audi cared a little bit more about what was up there. And one thing most people don't realise is you can't just put wider arches on the back quarters and the front wings of a S4 or a standard A4 to get this look, because, well, the curvature and the wideness is actually integrated into the door itself. And just look at how wide those sills are as well. And one little neat feature that this car has to match the trim, the carbon trim inside here, is of course carbon roof racks. Maybe not the most practical, but look really, really cool. And also carbon fiber B-pillars and, I don't know, are these C-pillars? Yeah, all these carbon fiber bits just to match the carbon fiber interior. This is the real party piece of this car, and one of the things that sets a standard RS4 apart from a standard S4. But of course, neither of these cars are standard. But let's kind of talk about that a little bit. But one of the most iconic things of the RS4 is, of course, the engine cover, the carbon engine cover with this kind of like Y shape of the intake manifold. This one here, obviously signed by Walter Röhrl, which is incredibly cool. And the engine itself, as I say, was tuned by Cosworth, and it went from the 265 horsepower that this should have to the 375 horsepower. But as I say, this car has had quite a few changes. This, just like this car, has also been upgraded to 2.8 litre naturally aspirated V6 heads, and it's also been stroked to 3 litres from the original 2.7, which puts this car about 650 to 700 horsepower on low boost. And from what I've heard, as soon as this car is tuned properly, that number should start with an 8, which would be kind of wild in something as understated as a B5. Also, if you don't want to buy B5, buy one of those instead, or Lada Niva. You can see it there, just like the RS2, it's built by Quattro GmbH. Because the engine bay is so tight in these, you can actually see many of the modifications, which is probably a good thing when it comes to cops and that. But yeah, as I say, about 700 horsepower, which is wild when you consider the fact that this is a 3 litre V6 from the late 90s. Just for comparison then, this is obviously the RS4, and then this is the S4, just with the intake out of the RS4. I think it's pretty much a plug and play. You can also put the RS4 turbos, so the turbos that originally came on that, onto this pretty easily as well. And turbo wise, even though we can't see them and they're hidden, it's running TTE 880s. And one interesting fact as well, it's running a Wagner intercoolers there, but it's also running a massive Wagner oil cooler. Let's see if we can see it down here. There's a massive Wagner oil cooler down there as well, and basically there's kind of like an extra little shield underneath that kind of just forces the air up into that Wagner oil cooler. Because when you build cars that have high horsepower, you do need to make sure that you can actually cool it and preserve that engine as well for as long as possible. It's also sitting on these massive 10J by 20 OZ Racing wheels with a C7 generation, so like a 2014 and up Audi RS6 caliper in the front, 390mm discs or 391mm discs, and in the back we have 365mm discs with the modified Audi R8 handbrake caliper separate to the main caliper. Two other funny little differences is the RS4 always has black grab handles on the inside, whereas the S4 only came with this kind of like shiny silver. And as well as that, the handbrake, the little nib at the top of the handbrake, well, on the RS4 it's always black, and if we go back over to the S4, it's always this kind of chrome color. The interior of the Audi RS4 is of course gorgeous. I love how timeless all of these old school Audi interiors are. I find they've kind of lost their way a little bit over the last few years, but this, even though like you wouldn't think that this is a design essentially that was introduced in 1997, so what's that, 27, 28 years ago. Oh, and one other difference I've noticed is this one actually has a cup holder. The S4, from what I noticed, didn't have a cup holder. And while these Recaro pole positions look mad, they were actually a factory option for an Audi RS4 Sport B5. And you can really see how mad that car is when you look at it from the backseat position. And one thing that's also quite rare is the fact that there's no heated seat controls, not even a blank here, which is kind of specific to the pole position, or the cars that came with pole position seats. So obviously this was retrofitted in together with the seats. But if we look on the S4, you can see what that should look like. And you have the heated seat control here. And again, it would look quite silly if you had the heated seat control, but there was nothing actually, and it wasn't actually doing anything. So this is a nice little level of detail that we typically don't see that often, sadly. And all of the Audi RS4s came with this carbon trim, this dark carbon trim. And while this S4 doesn't come with carbon trim, it did come with the option of it. However, that carbon trim had a blue weave in it, just like the one in my S6. And the spoiler is that you could only get on the RS4 and you couldn't get for the S4. So let me know, which of these two mad Audis would you choose? B5 RS4, B5 S4? Would you keep them stock, or would you modify them like this? And if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to share it with at least one person. Also, please don't follow or subscribe to Retrograde if you don't like old school and classic cars like this. And definitely don't check out our Instagram, where we have another 580,000 or so people who love exactly the same cars as I do. I hope you enjoyed this little video, and we'll talk to you, as always, in the next one. Cheers, take care, bye-bye.